Yes, I do. I guess for anyone who is born in Europe, automatically you must identify as a European. So I don't think I've ever considered myself something else. So I come from Romania. It's a European country. You are by default a European. Um, what kind of an European you are, I think that is a question open for debate, and increasingly so today. You can be a European that cares about Europe in very many ways. Some Europeans seem to be very eager on defending certain understandings of Europe. Others hold more inclusive ideas about Europe. And obviously, today we are in the middle of a clash between these two perspectives. I grew up in communist Romania, which was a European country at the time, not having what we call today not holding what we call today European values. I refer to human rights, democracy. It was a totalitarian regime, and I think growing up in that context, what it left with me was a longing for something that I did not have, for a kind of life that was impossible, and that I associated more with Europe or Western Europe, and that is the freedom to be yourself, to uh, do what you want to do in your community, in your country, to be able to go away and come back. Things that were not necessarily, or at least I was perceiving them as not existing at that point in time. So if I think that that really shaped the way I think about Europe, but in a very particular way, as experiencing the opposite of what I imagined Europe to be. I think so. I was 8 when the the revolution against the communist regime in Romania happened. So it was maybe a little bit earlier, but probably that was such a strong moment. Not necessarily the revolution itself, which at the time I perceived to be something very positive, but rather the experience of communism beforehand, the experience of a totalitarian regime, of being closed in a country with a regime that you don't trust and that is controlling you, or and you can just cannot escape that. So that experience, I think, is probably the most powerful one, and I define Europe in contrast to that experience. So, and I think that's why, obviously, I was extremely happy when the revolution took place. I was extremely happy when Romania joined the EU. But that was maybe the negative experiences in our life leave a deeper mark than the positive ones. But I was happy about that, particularly because I had this sort of negative experience as I was growing up. Um, and it's something that stays with me whenever I am in such a context. Those memories come back and those feelings come back, although I was very young. For me, Brexit is the worst moment in recent European history. I think that's um, to me, again, that is showing a failure in bringing together Eastern Europe and Western Europe after the fall of the communist regimes. I think a lot of the Brexit dynamic has to do with the Romanians and Polish people in the UK, and it basically shows that we have done much less than we should have done in terms of bringing the two sides of Europe together. So I mentioned Brexit because that's maybe the strongest illustration of this failure. But for me, it's basically the failure of the European project after the fall of the communist regime, or maybe not necessarily the European project, but rather the failure to use this window of opportunity that was opened by the failure of the communist regimes in Europe. Well, probably the best is the fact that the communist regimes fell, and basically we have still fairly free countries in Central and Eastern Europe. Um, so I think that's excellent. Coming from and living at the moment in one of these countries, it's wonderful to be able to live in your country and enjoy the freedom of a democratic regime. It's a pity to see that this is changing in several countries in the region. Um, the happy moment was 1989, I guess, in certain ways, which brought this freedom. But it's not a completely happy moment because we're already in 2019 and we see some of these countries actually going back towards an authoritarian mindset and regime. So I think it will take a few more years to see whether that experience stays completely positive or it was just a moment in history. For me personally, I think it is the ability to study, work, live in various parts of Europe to get to have a more diverse understanding of what Europe is. I think that is probably the most wonderful thing that Europe has to offer to its own citizens and not only. Um, and I am extremely glad that this came in my life at a moment when I could take advantage of this. In a sense, to still exist. But maybe if I go more in depth, I do think it comes around how we handle the new EU member countries coming together with the all the EU member countries. And I don't think we are working enough on that. I think the views of the world are fairly different. I think that the lived experiences of the past and of the present are not appreciated in the same way. And there is basically a lot to do on both sides to understand the other and to build a space where everyone actually feels appreciated and recognized. I think the EU at the moment is failing in recognizing the experiences of many of the Eastern European countries. At the same time, that leads to certain policies in place and certain, when we talk about immigration or education, cultural policies, that basically do not tune the Western societies to this experience of coming together with countries that have a completely different past. Also, I feel there is no recognition for the traumas that the totalitarian regimes meant for Central East European countries and the role of Western European countries in actually enabling those negative experiences to come about. It's basically too much of a one narrative in the EU at the moment, a narrative where or in which neither the Western countries nor the Eastern countries find themselves anymore. So I guess we should just abandon this sort of fake talk and really go back to the experiences and the relevance that the historical facts have for the different parts of the EU, and bring those more meaningful experiences and understandings together in something like a EU that makes sense more for the people across the continent.